Thanks, guys. How's everybody doing today? That's a terrible question to ask a room full of people. And have everybody shouting back at the same time, but you did a good job. Everybody said good. But if you're not doing good, right? If I say, how's everybody doing? And one of you just yells terrible in a sea full of good, it's a worthless question to ask from stage. So this, just a point of order as I get started here. If you're ever speaking in public, don't ask everybody how they're doing because everybody can't be honest about it, right? Because, so anyway, that's how I want to start my whole talk with you guys today. Come on, Corey, get your stuff together. Well, I'm glad to be back, man. It's good to be here. It's good to see some of the faces I saw last week, which means I didn't run you away at least. I don't see some faces from last week, so they're either busy or I did run them away. Sorry, Travis, and when you get back, you can repair what I broke. But I'm grateful to be here. It's always a good time when I'm here. Love getting to come to the city. I drive in from Livermore. Have you guys even heard of Livermore? Yeah. It's like over there, like, in the East Bay. It's like way out there, but that's where I drive in from. But I'm happy to be here. This week was my birthday, by the way. I turned 44 on Thursday. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. And I'm told you're going to remember that forever, is what I heard. That's what I heard. So, like, I've reached the age where, like, you don't even really, I'm pretty sure it's 44. But, you reach that age where it's like you kind of stop counting because it's like, oh, you just, you're moving closer and closer to just being older than maybe you ever imagined you actually wanted to be, for me anyway. No offense to anyone who's older than 44 because all the ages above 44 are beautiful. That's what I'll say. And you're welcome. You're welcome. We've been in this summer fruit series. If you've been following along and if you were here last week, I talked about kindness. And what I really do hope is that if you were here and heard me talk about kindness, that you remembered to be kind to yourself this past week. And that you remember moving forward to be kind to yourself. Because you can't be kind to others if you're not kind to yourself. And what we've been talking about is, in essence, these virtues, these values, these things that are evident of a person whose life is influenced by the Spirit, right? This is what the fruits of the Spirit are. Your life is influenced by the Spirit. If the Spirit is working in your life, if you're allowing the Spirit to flow through your life, there's certain things that should show up. And we talked about joy. We've talked about kindness. And today we're going to talk about goodness. There are these things that should be a natural outflow that you've been influenced by the Spirit, that you've allowed that to happen in your life. And that's what we've been talking about. And so today I want to talk about goodness. But before I talk about goodness, I want to share with you something I've only shared with close friends and my therapist because it's really troubled me really my whole life. When I was in first grade, I think it was first or second grade, I was at a Christian school in Collinsville, Illinois. And back then, I'm 44, so I can say back then now. Back then, we did the President's Physical Fitness. I don't think they do that anymore, do they? No? When did they stop? Never mind. It's a conversation. I'm trying to have a conversation with everyone right now. I'm not going to do that anymore. So I'm doing President's Physical Fitness, and we're running a mile, right? And it's 4 laps around this. I think it's like a pond or something. I still remember the gravel that I was running on. And I was way out in front of everybody. I mean, I'm just like, I'm out there, I'm running, and today I would never run a mile, but back then I was just like cruising through this mile, and my best friend, Ben Greer, was behind me. And as we turned the corner, we're running, I'm just out, it's just like, it's easy money, right? I'm about to win this race, and something inside of me said, slow down and let Ben win. And I slowed down, and I let Ben win. And I still vividly remember, like after the race was over, we go to the ceremony, and I get this dusty red ribbon, and I watch Ben get this majestic, bright blue, angels are singing ribbon that says first place. And I'm like thinking to myself, then I'm like, Corey, why did you do that? Why did you let him win? And he didn't even say thank you. Like Ben wasn't even like, dude, man, I know you slowed down so I can win. I really appreciate that, man. Really, you deserve this ribbon more than I do. You can have it. None of that happened. I went home with this dusty red ribbon, and he has this, to this day, probably has mounted on his wall at his house, this beautiful blue ribbon, and I took second place. I took second place on purpose. And why I've gone, it's come up in therapy, legit come up in therapy because I think back to this moment, because something about the culture we live in is not one that is favorable or one where we would ever imagine that we were going to not win. We're in a society that's about winning. You win at all cost. I mean, we just in San Francisco, well, me and Livermore, you in San Francisco, got to celebrate another win by the Golden State Warriors, which, by the way, Travis, I know you're listening to this. You told everybody you were at Game 4. I was also at Game 4, and I feel some type of way that Travis didn't tell you that I was also there. I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't know why he left that out. I mean, we didn't see each other there, but I was there, and I got interviewed, actually, by some local San Francisco reporter, and I can also testify that the Boston fans are absolutely terrible human beings. That's probably too strong. Yeah, that is too strong. Let me back that up. They are really, really not nice people. Not nice people. But we in our society, we want to put something out in the world so that we win. You know, you get a patent on something so that you can keep winning. You go to work so that you can win. We're all about winning. We started lamenting several years ago the participation prizes, right? We were like, you shouldn't get an award for just participating. We're not a culture that's like about effort, about doing the thing just because the thing is valuable. We just are a culture that's like, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. Like, this is our culture. Like, don't we kind of have that? Don't you have this like thing? Don't you want, like, if you have children that are playing sports, or when you were playing sports, didn't you just want your kids to just win? In fact, I have had my children have been in sports since they were really little. And I am one of those parents that actually doesn't pay attention to the game when my kids aren't in it. Like, I know you guys are, better than me, and you cheer for little Susie and Jesse, even when your daughter or son are not in the game. Not me. When my kids come out of the game, because I'm on my phone, but that's just, it's like I want my kids to win. This is a part of how we are. And the value of goodness, and the way I want to talk about goodness today, actually challenges this notion of us winning, or of us putting effort forth so that we can win. Putting effort forth so that we get a thank you. Putting effort forth so that somebody notices what we've done and says, wow, good job. But before we get to that, I want everybody to do this. I want you to take your phone out or get a pen and paper, because I want you to write down one word. And that word is mitzvah. Mitzvah. I want you to write it down, because I want you to take it with you. Now, you don't have to. I mean, I'm not the boss of you. So if you decide you don't want to, whatever, you just lose out. But it's on you. If you don't want to write it down, don't write it down. But I want you to write down mitzvah, because I want you to take this with you. How many of you already know what that word mitzvah means, or at least you've heard it before? You've got some familiar. You've probably heard bar mitzvah. But you have some familiarity. Wow, I got it out. Familiarity with that word, mitzvah. I want to talk to you about that word and help us understand the Jewish principle of mitzvah. I actually called a Jewish friend of mine yesterday who's like, amazingly, like, I didn't know this about them, but they're like a Jewish scholar. Every time I ask them something about a Jewish word or Hebrew word, they're like, oh yeah, this means this. So they gave me a bunch of resources about this word mitzvah, and I want to take us into it, because it will speak to something that Jesus said to his disciples that I'm not sure we actually catch or pay attention to. But before we do that, I think we need to take a look at this word mitzvah. So mitzvah's literal meaning is command. The literal word, the word mitzvah means command, but it's understood to mean an act of goodness. It's something good. It's a good deed. The Jerusalem Talmud commonly refers to any charitable act as the mitzvah. Often the word mitzvah is related to the Aramaic word, I'm going to try to say this word, tavda. Tavda. And it can mean companionship or personal attachment. In this sense, a mitzvah bundles up a person who is commanded to the commander, creating a relationship and an essential bond. So the three meanings can themselves be bundled together. Good is defined as that which the creator of the universe wants done with his universe. And by doing that which the creator wants done, we are bound up with him in body, mind, and soul. So in essence, what the idea of mitzvah is, when we engage in mitzvah, which is doing good for good's sake, it is an act of goodness. We are actually binding ourselves to the Creator. Not only binding ourselves to the Creator, but we're binding ourselves to one another. Doing good in the world is actually a way of us binding ourselves together. So this value, this virtue of goodness that we're talking about today is one that's about us doing something. And it isn't about action. And I know we hear, like, in the Christian tradition, there's a lot of talk about grace and our salvation not being about works, and I totally agree with that. It's not about what you do, that you're salvation. I personally believe that salvation is finished. However, the principle and the practice of goodness, again, is not about your reward. It's not about your ribbon. It's not about you getting a prize. The principle of goodness is about putting good in the world, because putting good in the world is the way that the Creator wants us to behave. It's the way that God designed us to be. It's how the world continues to be shaped and formed in the way that God wants it to be formed, by us putting goodness out into the world. So I want us to, the reason I wanted to take us into this, Jewish understanding of mitzvah, and this word mitzvah, which means to, an act, charitable act, is because sometimes in America, we have this thing that we do that some people call colonization. It's this thing we do. We take things that was funnier than y'all actually reacted to. Like, golly, I mean, I feel kind of sick, but as I make these jokes, it's like, man, anyway, I'm done making jokes. Okay, no more jokes, guys. No more jokes. So if it's in America, what we do is we take another culture, we take another custom, we take another tradition, another ritual, and we kind of use it, and we enjoy it, and we participate in it, but we don't necessarily bring with it all the richness, all the things that it means. As an example, Cinco de Mayo. Right? Cinco de Mayo, we, here in America celebrate as Mexican Independence Day. Mexicans don't celebrate their Independence Day on May 5th. They celebrate in September. Did you know that? I didn't know that until the other day. I thought Cinco de Mayo was a Mexican holiday. It's not. It's an American holiday where we just, we use it as an excuse to eat tacos and drink tequila, which, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with eating tacos or drinking tequila. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with celebrating Cinco de Mayo. My point being is that sometimes what happens here in the United States is when we take something that has a deep, rich meaning for other folks, and we appropriate it for our use and our purpose, we sometimes lose the value. And in the Christian tradition in America, we've actually done this with Jesus. You take this Jewish rabbi and make him an American Christian. Jesus was neither Christian nor American. And I understand that for some of you that could be a shock. I think the American part is not a shock, although there are actually people in the United States who actually believe. Many of you may be seen it. There's quotes where people say Jesus was a good American, thinking that Jesus was white, because we see these images. So what we lose is this rich tradition of Judaism that Jesus taught from. So in Matthew chapter 6, there's this teaching that Jesus is doing with his disciples. And it begins in verse 1, and he says to them, when you do tzedakah, which is basically philanthropy or charitable giving, he tells them, when you do it, don't make a show of it. Don't be flashy with it. When you do it in private. Do it secretly. Do it so no one knows that you did it. Do it, run the race in such a way, if you let somebody win, no one knows that you did it. Do it in such a way that you're not posting it all over the place. They didn't have Twitter or Instagram back then in Jesus' day, but if they did, he would have said, don't put it on Instagram that you fed some homeless people. And if you do, you've already received your reward. That's the reward. The like that you got for going on social media and said, look at me giving a sandwich to a homeless person, that's the reward. But Jesus said to his disciples, he says, hey, if you're going to do good in the world, do it in such a way that you do it in secret, so that God, who sees it in secret, as I said, the mitzvah, that you are bound together with the Creator, do it in such a way that you are actually following the command of the Creator to put good in the world. Jesus, the Jewish rabbi, is teaching mitzvah to his disciples. He's teaching them to the value of doing something good because it's good, not because you get a reward for it, not because you get a promotion or because you get a raise or because people will applaud you for it. It's doing good because it's good. I actually stumbled upon this one time. My wife and I were at a gas station long before gas was $12 a gallon. We were at this gas station in Livermore, which you guys never heard of, and there was a woman there. And she came up to me and she said, "Could you put some gas in my car?" And she asked me in this way that was not necessarily a request. It was almost kind of forceful, right? Could you give me some gas? And my wife and I had this conversation because, one of the ways that I was raised and the way I grew up thinking about, being charitable in the world or doing good things in the world is that there is an expectation that there's a way that people will ask you, right? And sometimes even growing up, if I'm being honest, growing up there was this idea that you don't give money to people who don't have homes because they're just going to use it for booze or drugs. And so you have this idea that I need to hold back my goodness because I'm not sure if you're a trustworthy person to receive the goodness. So this woman, she asked me for gas, and I'm sitting in the car, and the way she asked me, I'm like, man, I feel a way about the way she asked me. I don't even trust that she's really, who she says she is, or this. Sometimes I try to ask people their story because I do want to humanize a person, right? Sometimes when we are dealing with people who have less than we do or are living in more extreme circumstances than us, we can dehumanize them. At least I can. I don't know about you, but I can. And I try to ask the name, what's your name? And try to understand your story. And so this woman, I'm trying to ask her name, and she didn't really want to tell me much of her story. So I pump the gas, and I get in the car, and I did not get that feeling you get when you do something for someone and they're so grateful. That thing, when you give a gift to somebody, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it, man. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you just don't understand. I've been waiting for this. Oh my God." When you watch someone who you give food to who was hungry and you watch them eat it and they're so grateful. They're bowing down, they're worshiping you, and you just feel like, "Oh yes, I did it. That's it. That's the reward right there." I didn't get that. She got in her car and drove off. And I got in the car, my wife and I were talking, and this was the first time ever, and it came back to me as I was thinking about this mitzvah today. I stumbled upon this idea that, you know what? I said, "You know what, babe? What we just did was put good in the world, and I think there is something valuable to that." From that day forward, I stopped wondering if people were trying to scam me. Didn't care. I said, "You don't have to be the way, that's just me." I stopped caring about whether or not I was being cheated or whether or not the money I gave someone to get food was going to be used for other purposes. I stopped caring about that because I felt like what I was doing was putting good in the world. That that there's something valuable to doing that. That there's something that can remake and reshape the world by doing that. In fact, the Jewish people tell us that in the beginning, this is how God did everything. The story in Genesis chapter 1 about creation is, I'll just tell you this, I'm not sure where you guys are on what you think about what this story is. Some people think it's literal history. I'm actually not a person who does think that. The story is, whether you think it's literal history or not, the story is actually written. The form of the story is it's a poem. This is a poem that falls in line with a lot of the ancient literature that is trying to make sense of the world and how we came to be. And in the Jewish people's telling of the world and how we came to be, when they describe the Creator creating everything, there's this word tov that shows up, which means good. This word shows up several times in this poem. It says, so the way this word shows up is it would say, "And God created this and an animal and the seas and the stars and the moon, and he separated this from that. And God saw that it was tov, that it was good." That every so often throughout this poem, as the writer of this poem is telling the story of creation, he comes across this word tov, and it was good, and it was good, and that 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 was good. So what are we hearing here? We're hearing that the Creator, when creating the earth, filled it with goodness. That everything was good, that the Creator was filling the world with goodness. And if one of the evidence is that the Spirit of God is directing our lives, is leading us, is our instructor, is that we then go and do the same thing. We are filling the world with good, not so that anybody could do anything in return for us, because what in the world could we ever do in return for the goodness that God has filled the earth with? You think God was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to fill this world with goodness, and they better be grateful for that. They sure better be grateful. You think God's like hovering over the world every night and every morning, going, you know what? Let me see how many people are thankful, because if they're not grateful, the sun ain't going to come up today. I promise you. They're going to be in the dark all day long till somebody says, "Thank you, God, for the light. Thank you, God, for the rain. Thank you, God." God is not looking for that. God is filling the world with goodness, and has filled the world with goodness, because goodness is a life-sustaining virtue that we all should be reaching for, and that not only reaching for to attain for ourselves, but as we reach for that fruit, that we're like sharing that with everybody. Goodness. What if we decided to not have our greatest pursuits be more winning, but our greatest pursuits be giving and putting more goodness in the world? What if we did those things without expecting anything in return? What if you and your partnership with your partner started being the kind of person who did good for them, not expecting them to turn around and do the same for you? Not expecting them anything in return. What if for your children? What if for your parents? What if for coworkers? What if for your neighbors? Imagine if for your neighbors in your neighborhood you started just doing good. You know, it's interesting. I was watching a movie once. I won't tell you the name of the movie because I don't want you to go watch it and be like, I can't believe you watched that movie. But there was this scene in this movie. Let me see how do I explain this in a way, in case there's people. Let me see, get the PGest version of this. This movie has a man who is falling in love with a worker of the night. You guys, are you tracking with me? Okay. Not like a graveyard shift worker, a worker of the night. And as he's falling in love with this woman, he walks in on her job with another one of his coworkers, and he walks in and she, they show, it's actually pretty graphic. They show some, never mind, I won't stay with the show. And then when she's finished, they sit down, and he says to her, "I love you, and I want to take you away with me." And it's some of the best acting I've ever seen, because her face when he says this turns like stone cold, and she just completely turns on him because she doesn't know how to receive goodness. There are lots of people in your life and in your world who don't know how to receive goodness, because our society is not a society that's about goodness for goodness sake. When I just recently had a friend who lavishly blessed me for my birthday, and the entire time I was feeling like, man, I don't know, man, I'm going to have to pay this back eventually. He can't just be doing this just because. It's just not the nature of us to just do something good in our society. But what if we started being people who just were like, hey, I just did this, number one, because I value you as a human being created in the image of God, but also because I feel like part of what it means to be a person who's led by the Spirit of God is to do good in the world. So I'm just doing it because of that. Imagine that conversation with your neighbor when they come over and they're like, man, I, you didn't have to cut our grass. You know, if you're listening to this somewhere cold, you didn't have to shovel our snow. Like I mean, like, and maybe someone asks you why you did it, and you just go, I don't know, the tradition I follow and the God that I try to, stay connected to inspired me to do it. Maybe you're in line at Starbucks and you, or whatever coffee shop is hip in San Francisco. That was another hilarious joke. Maybe it's like the delivery. I need to watch Chris Rock or somebody. Maybe not Chris Rock, because I don't need. Yeah, that's maybe too soon. Too soon. But what if we just started doing stuff like that? And what if when people have a hard time with it, that like we sat with them and help them understand that goodness is what they come from? There's a lot of like theological debate, and depending on the church or Christian tradition you're part of, maybe there's not a lot of debate in the group that you're in, but in the greater theological context, there's debate about whether or not the nature of man is good or the nature of man is wicked. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that when God created us, God said, good. When God created you, God was like, good. And maybe you don't feel good. Maybe you don't feel like a good person. Maybe you feel like I do some really messed up things. I do some things I don't want to do. Like I have trauma that informs some of the ways that I behave, some of the ways that I talk to people, some of the habits that I have are trauma informed, and I don't really feel like a good person. That trauma, that way of being that you look at and think, oh, that's so ugly, that is not the default of your personhood. The default of your personhood is goodness. Because that is what you were created in by the Creator who is good. That is your nature. It's goodness. So like I said last week, some people can't be kind to themselves. There are some of you in this room right now who don't feel like you are a good person. You were created good. And the more that we continue to connect to the Spirit of God, there is just more goodness. It's a natural outflow. It's not something you're working for. There's a cricket in here all of a sudden. Wow. Sorry, whoever your phone was on, that was a really jerk move. I mean, my phone's been on a lot of times, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I should, whatever. Let's move on. One of the ways I think we can all start to put good in the world is by caring about justice for the poor. In fact, in Proverbs 29:7 says, good people care about justice for the poor, but the wicked are not concerned. Now, my wife and I were talking about this in the way when I was driving over here, and it's interesting because I don't think the Bible is written the Bible is written, I mean, all of these, the Bible means many books over thousands of years, so there is a context and an audience for the writing, but I'm not sure that the Bible audience is just towards rich people. Yet this is here that says, good people care about justice for the poor, but the wicked are not concerned. Well, what about people who don't necessarily consider themselves rich? Is it like, this is kind of just food for your thought, just for you to walk away with, like, if I'm a person who doesn't have all of the means that I need, is me caring about justice for myself virtuous, right? Like, is it virtuous? Either way, looking at most of us in this room, given the fact that, we are, I would argue, probably 99, if not 100% of us are in the top 1% in the world when it comes to wealth. This certainly would apply to us when it comes to good people caring about justice for the poor. Like, I don't want anyone to feel like you cannot have means and be a good person. But here's the tension I do want you to live in if you are a person with means. Because Jesus would say you cannot serve both God and money. And I think the reason Jesus says this is because there is something to the attaining and the acquiring of wealth that can dehumanize the acquirer and also dehumanize all the people around them. There is something about capitalism, and I'm not like here to advocate for any other form of whatever. Like if you have an issue with me saying the word capitalism, whatever. I mean, this is my last week speaking for a while anyway. So, like, there is something about living in a society that rewards you for winning at all cost that can do something to the soul that I don't think is healthy. There's something to always being about winning that I don't think is healthy for our soul, and I don't think helps us understand this principle of mitzvah, which is just to do good. And if that doing good means that I am poor, that's what it means. But so many of us, and I'm saying us because I'm in that us, so many of us are so tempted with compromising values of goodness and kindness and joy and all the fruit of the Spirit because what's in front of us is reward. And if I can get the reward, I'll settle up later with the virtue. I'll come back to the virtue after I get the reward, after I get the house, the car, the money, the promotion, whatever it takes for me to get there. I'll come back to the virtue of goodness because that's always there, but I don't always have opportunity to make this kind of money. And slowly but surely we start to lose our soul because the nature of gain, the nature of always wanting to win, which is the opposite of mitzvah, the nature of that is that there is always more. There's this line from the latest gosh, what's the name of the movie? Wall Street with Shia LaBeouf. What happened to him, by the way? Where did he go? It's like the Transformers. He was like everywhere. Then he had that like, do it. You guys remember that thing he did? And then he just disappeared. If you guys, anybody knows where he is, just find me after and let me know what's going on with our guy Shia. But there's this line in this movie where Shia LaBeouf, however you say his name, is asking Josh Brolin, who's also one of my favorite actors. Thanos, Josh Brolin, you guys know who that is? Okay. He asked him, like, what's your number? He's talking about how much money do you want? And Josh Brolin's answer is more. He didn't even have a number. It's more. That's the nature of gain. That's the nature of losing your soul to like having and gaining and getting more and more and more and more and continuing to compromise. The nature is that you eventually lose your soul. In fact, Jesus tells this story where he says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Real quick, and then I'll wrap up. He tells this story about a person who builds a giant barn and keeps building and is going away building and building and building and building and building. And then when he's done building, he says, I don't have anybody to share this with. And see, many of us have read that story, at least I read that story thinking that what Jesus is saying that by virtue of him building and getting so much stuff that he lost his soul, it wasn't by getting the stuff that he lost his soul. He lost his soul because of the line that he said when he said, there is nobody around me now. I have been so busy building this barn that I have isolated myself from community and anyone else. So there's no goodness for me to share because there's nobody around me to share it with. Some of us give so much of ourselves to our careers and our goals and our aspirations that we have isolated ourselves from families, from friends, from even our own partners, our children. And the caution for all of us today is that we bind ourselves to mitzvah and therefore bind ourselves to our Creator and the Creator's command to put good in the world. And I think in doing that, everything else will take care of itself. For you, for me, for the world, let's just keep putting goodness out there. Let's pray. God, I'm grateful today for this opportunity that we've had to sit in this together. I pray that these words will find their way into all of our hearts, that we'll wrestle with this, that we will walk away with our our hearts and minds challenged to do good in the world. I pray, God, that you would help all of us to feel and have a sense of our own goodness, the innate goodness that you created us in and with. In Christ's name, amen. Guys, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, and Travis and Jenna, thank you so much for inviting me. What I do hope that, like, those of you that wrote down the word mitzvah, I do hope this is something that you sit with. Like, I do hope this isn't one of those things where, like, you check the box, I went to church on Sunday. Like, I really do hope that, like, you throughout this entire series, whatever's left, that, like, when you walk away from a Sunday like this, that you walk away going, okay, yeah, there's some stuff I need to think through, process. There's some stuff I need to talk to my children about, my partner about. There's some things that need to be worked through in my life, and I'll tell you, like, I try to be like a vessel of the stuff I'm saying, more so than I'm like telling you something that, like, I've figured out, because I certainly haven't. And so I hope all of us can walk away with wrestling with this notion of goodness, and I so appreciate you. Until next time, grace and peace to all of you.